Kudlow Debt Summit continues this evening. Let us begin. Here now is the former chief economist for Vice President Biden, that being Jared Bernstein. He's a senior fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities and a CNBC contributor. Also with us, we welcome Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Good evening, gentlemen. Mr. Johnson, let me begin with you. You're at the very top of the National Review Online with an article that calls you a one-man protest against these talks. Can you tell us why you're a one-man protest?
Well, hello, Larry. Thanks for having me on. Now, I think this is a disgusting process from my standpoint. We've been here 6 months, and now at the 11th hour, what we're going to decide the financial fate of America behind closed doors with just a couple people. You know, Larry, we're talking about a $3.6, $3.7 trillion a year budget. And the fact of the matter is the U.S. Senate, controlled by Democrats, have not passed a budget in over 2 years. I think 800 days tomorrow. You know, they should have had a budget passed by April 15th. We should have seen the detail. We should have been debating it. We should have been reviewing this. And now what we're going to do is, do some deal on a $3.7 trillion budget and get a couple days to review it before it's passed? No, it's a disgusting process, and I am not happy with it.
Senator, one more before I get to my friend Jared Bernstein. Do you think, looking back on this whole thing, folks would have been better off just passing a clean debt ceiling increase bill and then doing the dirty work on the budget later on?
No, because, Larry, we're bankrupting America. It's the only reason I ran for the U.S. Senate, because we're bankrupting this nation. And I've always thought this was a two-step process. The first thing we have to do is we have to put in structural spending caps and restraints. And one of those things really is a constitutional amendment to limit the size of government and to eventually balance the budget. Until we do that, we're just going to be arguing over the details, and nobody's going to agree on anything. So it's almost a fruitless effort.
Jared Bernstein, along the lines of being cynical and skeptical, is this a fig leaf for President Obama's reelection, or do you think these talks are actually real and will produce real results, Jared?
Hey, Larry, you know me better than that. Cynical, skeptical, that's not what I'm about. Look, I actually think what Kristen said earlier in your interview with her about a quiet air of optimism, I might not go that far. Maybe I'm a little cynical, but it does seem that the body language, what we're hearing from the negotiators, is that they're doing what the president suggested yesterday, which I think is so important. The senator may disagree with me, but I think it's critical, which is leaving your ultimatums at the door, leaving your dogma. Everybody get out of your comfort zone. You're hearing Democrats, especially the president, talk about going into entitlement cuts, and you're beginning to hear some Republicans entertain revenues, not from increasing tax rates, but from closing tax loopholes.
But Jared, my friend, what I heard from the report was Nancy Pelosi rushing to the microphones to say there will be no benefit cuts for Medicare and Social Security. And that tells me that there is no comity here, that the Democratic Party is going to walk out,
I think
and that
that's
nothing's going to get done. So
Larry,
I don't see this spirit of compromise.
No, I think you're making a very fair point there, and you're still hearing what I guess I'd have to think of as somewhat of posturing on both sides in order to get better leverage. But I actually think that there are some cuts in the offing, that people are putting things on the table. For example, if you went to the chain CPI price index on Social Security, that would be a benefit cut, but it's something Democrats are more comfortable with than something like raising the retirement age.
Right,
so some of it depends on how you talk about it.
All right, that's an interesting point, Senator Johnson. Just on that point that Jared raised, the so-called chained consumer price index, which would, over time, cause a smaller increase in cost of living adjustments for beneficiaries in both Social Security and Medicare, if I understand it. Senator Johnson, can you live with that? It would affect beneficiaries. Can you live with that?
Well, Larry, here's the problem. People have been talking about that for really quite some time. They should have been talking about this in the open months ago. And that's my problem. That's the point I'm trying to make, is this president has been so incredibly unserious about this. Remember, his budget that he dropped on Congress 4 months ago, it lost in the Senate 0 to 97 because it would have added $12 trillion to our net debt over the next 10 years. So now all of a sudden, the 11th hour, they're going to start throwing all kinds of proposals at us and say that, Republicans Republicans just aren't willing to compromise. The compromising should have occurred 4 months ago when they actually produced a plan that was serious, and that's what they haven't done. They've backed America's back up against the wall by doing it so close to the debt ceiling.
Larry, can I ask the Senator a question?
Go ahead.
Look, I mean, Senator, I've never got a vote for anything in my whole life, so I have great respect for any elected official. But what I hear you saying sounds very backward-looking. You seem like you're very upset with everything that's gone on until today. And by the way, I can share some of that upsetness with you.
Oh,
we shouldn't be where we are. But forward-looking, there needs to be a deal. And the things you're saying, the way I think you're framing this, doesn't sound like you're willing to negotiate and try to get a deal so this nation avoids default and we get this economy back on track.
Listen, Mr. Bernstein, there's a proposal out there right now, and it's extremely reasonable. Cut, cap, and balance. We cut, not dramatically. You cut a couple percentage off last year's budget. Then you put in statutory caps to start putting that fiscal discipline statutorily to put us on a glide path toward a balanced budget. Then we actually agree to increase the debt ceiling, contingent on the fact that we send a constitutional amendment for the people to decide, the states to decide. That's a very simple proposal. It's also very reasonable.
You're right. And Senator, I would be happy to debate that proposal with you. There's a lot there to talk about. But that is not what's on the table. We have a debt ceiling looming at us on August 2nd. I totally agree with you. It took us too long to get here.
And whose fault is it that it's looming? It's the president's fault.
Senator,
it's the Senate Democrats' fault. So again, this is a very reasonable proposal. We can get this thing done very quickly. Cut, cap, and balance, and then we'll increase the debt ceiling. There will be no crisis.
Senator Johnson,
there will be no crisis.
Senator Johnson, isn't what's going to happen? You're not going to see a 2% cut in next year's budget. All the so-called budget cuts, which aren't cuts, they're just slower increases, will be postponed until year 8, year 9, and year 10 of the budget period, and will never come to materialize. Isn't that what always happens, Senator Johnson? If you don't get your spending cap for 2012, then you can kiss those so-called spending cuts goodbye. Isn't that really what's going to happen, Senator?
Which is why you need a constitutional amendment long-term to do it. But we really would be cutting next year. It's not dramatic. It's, in the Ryan budget's about $89 billion.
Jared Bernstein, we're not going to see spending cuts for next year. They're not going to be real spending cuts. That's my problem with this whole process. We'll raise the debt bill, but we won't get the spending cuts.
With due respect to you and the Senator, I'm glad you're not in that room. You're talking about a balanced budget amendment. You're talking about 2/3 of the state ratifying this. If you think that's going to happen in weeks, it's simply not going to be the case.
About a spending cap?
Let's deal with the deal that's on the table,
Larry,
which is a serious deal that cuts spending by trillions.
The proposal is we'll increase the debt ceiling by passing a balanced budget amendment to the states for ratification. Let the American people decide if they want that fiscal discipline. We could get that done in a week. That's not a problem. It's very simple. It's very reasonable.
I'm afraid that's an irresponsible path.
I'm
afraid that's an irresponsible path.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, thank you. A one-man protest movement, and Jared Bernstein is just a one man among men. Thank you both for coming.